Was Jung redefining God or quietly replacing him? What if, in trying to understand God, we accidentally replaced him? What if the language of psychology sounds like belief, but is it actually something else entirely? This is where Carl Jung becomes controversial, because for all his brilliance, not everyone agrees with him. In fact, some theologians looked at Jung's work and said, "This isn't incomplete, it's wrong. Not slightly wrong, but fundamentally wrong in ways that actually matter." Up to this point, we've explored Jung with respect, and rightly so. He gave us one of the deepest maps of the human mind ever created. But intellectual honesty demands something more. We have to look at the strongest arguments against him, because if you're going to use Jung to understand your inner life, you should also know where his ideas break. 1. The category error. The first objection is simple but devastating. Jung talks about God as a psychological reality, the God image, the archetype, the numinous experience. All of these describe something happening inside the human mind. But theology is making a completely different claim. It's not asking, what does the mind experience? It's asking, what actually exists? In traditional Christianity, Judaism, Islam, God exists independently of us. Before any human mind existed, God was. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, God would still be. So when Jung says, God is real as a psychological fact, the theologian hears, you change the subject. Because describing an experience of God is not the same as describing God himself. It's like studying dreams about the ocean instead of asking whether the ocean exists. The criticism is this: Jung takes the word God, empties it of its original meaning, and replaces it with a function of the psyche. And then he speaks as if nothing has changed, but everything has changed. 2. The Gnosticism problem. The second objection goes deeper. It's the accusation of Gnosticism, an ancient idea that says, the material world is flawed, even corrupt, and true spirituality is about escaping it. In Gnostic thinking, the goal is not to redeem the world, it's to transcend it. The body, history, society, these become obstacles. But Christianity rejected this completely, because if God became flesh, then flesh matters. If God entered history, then history matters. If God created the world, then the world is not a prison. Now here's the tension. Jung focuses almost entirely on the inner world, the unconscious, dreams, archetypes, individuation, and critics argue this makes spirituality too internal, too isolated, too focused on the individual psyche, and not enough on community, history, or reality itself. It starts to resemble a modern version of Gnosticism, not identical, but structurally similar. 3. The relativism issue. The third objection sounds more subtle, but cuts just as deep. Jung treats all religions as expressions of the same psychological patterns, different symbols, same underlying structure. Christianity, Hinduism, Taoism, all become variations of the same inner reality. At first, this feels respectful, inclusive, even wise. But theologians push back. If all religions are saying the same thing, then none of them are actually true in the way they claim to be. Because religions don't just offer symbols, they make claims, specific ones, about reality, about history, about God. Either those claims are true, or they're not. They can't all be reduced to psychological expressions without losing what makes them meaningful. So the criticism is this: Jung gains tolerance by sacrificing truth. 4. The anthropocentrism problem. And finally, the deepest objection of all. Jung's framework is centered on the human mind. God is understood through human experience, human symbols, human psychology. But theology says, you've got it backwards. We don't define God based on our experience. God defines us. In classical theology, God doesn't depend on us to exist, to be known, or to be real. But in Jung's framework, God becomes something we encounter within ourselves. And that subtle shift changes everything. Because now, the human psyche sits at the center, not God. So, is Jung wrong? Not exactly. And this is where things get interesting. Jung never claimed to prove what exists beyond the psyche. He stayed in his lane. He studied experience. What happens when humans encounter the sacred? And that's valuable, deeply valuable. But it's also limited, because psychology can describe the experience of God without answering whether God exists beyond that experience. So, maybe the real takeaway is this. Jung is not a replacement for theology. He's a tool, a way to understand why symbols matter, why the sacred appears, why the inner world feels alive. But if you push his framework too far, it starts to collapse. So the challenge is balance. Use Jung, but don't be trapped by him. Let him explain the inner experience of God without assuming has explained God himself. Because maybe the psyche is not the source of the sacred. Maybe it's the place where something beyond us is trying to be seen. We're near the end now, 18 episodes in, and this is where things sharpen. Because taking an idea seriously means being willing to question it. Jung didn't give final answers. He opened questions, and those questions are still alive. 2 episodes left. Subscribe to Empire of the Side. Mind if you want to see how it all comes together. And tell me, which objection hits hardest for you? Where do you think Jung stands strongest, and where does he fall apart? Next time, we bring Jung into conversation with William James, where psychology meets philosophy and experience meets truth.